We are rolling. So, Rabbi Sai, we are on the very bottom of Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Beis in Zevachim, and let me just point out that the whole premise of this very lengthy Mishnah in the very beginning of the 14th parak of Zevachim was talking about the idea of shchutei chutz. We know that a person gets kares if he shechts a korban outside the Beis HaMikdash. Hashem says that person is cut off from v'nichras ha'ishahu mikerav amo. He's cut off from his people. So the Mishnah had said that this idea that you get cut off, you get kares for shchutei chutz, is only if the animal was meant for the mizbeach. If it was usable for the mizbeach, if it was meant for the mizbeach. But let's say it was never meant for the mizbeach. So you have the Seir HaMishtaleach and the Para Aduma as the two examples. If I go ahead and I shech those animals outside the temple in a place where they were never designated, so I don't get kares for that. I may have done the wrong thing, but I don't get kares for shchutei chutz. Then the Mishnah had given us the example, and how do I know that? Because the pasuk says ve'el pesach ol moed lo hevio, that it has to have meant to be brought to the door of the Beis HaMikdash. You know, the door of the Heichal. But if it wasn't meant to be brought there, so then you're off the hook. The next part of the Mishnah said, what if it was meant to be brought to the Mizbeach, but the animal became puzzle? So the examples that were brought were Haroveya v'hanirva, if an animal was used for bestiality, v'hamuksa v'hanevad, or if it was used or designated for avodah zarah, v'hamechir v'ha'esnan, or if it was used to barter either for a dog or prostitution, which also makes the animal puzzle, and v'hakilayim v'hatreifa v'yotzei dofan, or if an animal is bichlal not usable because of its birth, it's, let's say, a crossbreed, or if it was a treifa, or it's a yotzei dofan, it was born cesarean section. All of these animals cannot be brought on the mizbeach. So therefore, if I shech them, even no matter how I designate them, it doesn't matter if they're meant to be a korban. But if I shech them outside the Beis HaMikdash, I don't get kares for shchutei chutz. Okay, that's where we're up to. Now, here, the Mishnah brought a second phrase in the pasuk. Instead of learning it out from ve'el pesach ol moed lo hevio, the Mishnah had brought lifnei mishkan Hashem. Another phrase in the pasuk that it has to have been usable for in front of the Mishkan of God. The question is obvious. Why do you need an extra 3 words to tell you the same thing? If it's not meant for the Mizbeach, then you're not liable for shchutei chutz, period. That should be derived from Ve'el Pesach Ol Moed Lo Hevio. Anything that was usable for the Mizbeach and is shechted outside, you get kares. But if it's not usable for the Mizbeach and you shecht it outside, you don't get kares. So why do you need to resort to a second phrase in that self-same pasuk? Just use the same words as we did for the case of the Seir HaMishtaleach and Para Aduma. That's really the nature of the Gemara's discussion over here. So that's where we're up to, in the very bottom line. Haroveya v'hanirva. V'hanami tepuk le mi pesach ol moed. Why don't you learn that very same halacha? Use the very same pasuk, the very same words of the first part of the pasuk to teach me this halacha as well. That since it's not meant for the mizbeach because it's puzzle because of bestiality, so then it can't be liable for shchutei chutz. So the Gemara says, well, let's break down each category. Bishlam roveya v'nirva mishkachas leida akdeshinu meikara v'hadar rivo. I could certainly understand why you need a separate pasuk for the case of an animal used for bestiality, because this is a case of what's called nira v'nidche, where it was originally usable as a korban, it was designated as a korban, totally kosher. I say, okay, this is my korban chatas, and then some guy comes along and he has his way with this animal. So the animal now becomes puzzle for a korban, but because originally it was usable, it's different from the other cases. Maybe the first part of the pasuk is only telling you when the animal was never meant for the mizbeach. So I need a separate part of the pasuk to tell me that even when the animal was originally usable for the mizbeach and then became precluded, you're still not liable for shchutei chutz. So that would make sense why you need a separate phrase in the pasuk, right? However, elamuksa v'nevad ein adam oser davar she'enu shelo. But how can you say that by the other cases? An animal designated or used for avodah zarah. If that animal was already sanctified as a korban, how could it become pasul because of avodah zarah? Once something becomes sanctified as a korban, it doesn't belong to me anymore, it belongs to Hashem. I can't go ahead and take something that belongs to someone else and asr it because of avodah zarah. If I go over to your cow and I start worshiping it, does your cow now become asr because of avodah zarah? Ein adam osir davar she'einu shelo. I can't prohibit something that doesn't belong to me. So if it's already been sanctified for God, how can I go ahead and pasul it because of avodah zarah? It has to belong to me. So by definition, we must be talking about where you worship the animal before it was sanctified. So therefore, it was never nir'eh. It was never usable. So why do you need a separate pasuk for that? So the Gemara answers, I'll tell you why. Because bekadshim kalim valiba de Rabbi Yossi Haglili, the Omer kadshim kalim mamon ba'alamu. Because Rabbi Yossi Haglili, if we say our Mishnah goes like Rabbi Yossi Haglili, he says that we're talking about perhaps an animal that was designated as a lower level kadshim, like a shlamim, and after it was designated, the person himself went ahead and worshipped the animal. According to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, a lower level animal, kadshim kalim, still is the property of the owner. Even though it's been sanctified for God, it's still the property of the owner. And therefore, I can pasul it, I can asr it because of avodah zarah. And therefore, that too is nireh v'nidche. It was usable temporarily, it was fit for use, and then it became precluded. D'tanya uma'alam ma'al ba'ashem, l'rabos kadshim kalim shehin mamono divrei Rabbi Yossi Haglili. So as Rabbi Yossi Haglili is quoted in the Brisa, the Brisa over here is talking about a korban shavua. What is a korban shavua? A person swears falsely that he doesn't have in his possession something that belongs. I go ahead and I swear to Bill. I say, Bill, I don't have your widget, and I swear about it in court. So the halacha is that if I then confess, I have to pay a penalty, plus I have to bring a special korban. If I say, Rabbi Yossi Haglili looks at the pasuk and sees the extra word bashem, which means that even when an animal was sanctified for God, but it is still the property of Bill, if I deny having it in my possession, I will still be liable for a korban shvua. So you see that according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, something could be the property of Bill and still be sanctified as a korban. So that's why if Bill were to go ahead and take his sacrificial animal and worship it for avodah zarah, it would be something that we call nireh v'nidche. It was originally usable, then precluded, and that's why you need an extra pasuk to tell me that despite the fact that it was originally nireh and then was nidche, it still is not subject to shchutei chutz, to the kares penalty. Hilkach roveya v'nirva devar erva muksa v'nevad avodas kochavim b'kadshim kalim. So therefore the Gemara says, okay, so we've covered roveya nirva. That's a case where, regardless of whose property it is, it can become, through an act of erva, can become precluded. So it's nireh v'nidche. Muksa v'nevad avodas kochavim b'kadshim kalim. We've established that, according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, if we're dealing with like a korban shlamim, even though it was designated for Hashem and it was nireh, it can become later prohibited if the owner worships it for avodah zarah. Esnan u'mechir kilaim yotzei dofan bivlados kadshim. But the other items on the list, which are when an animal is bartered for avodah zarah, an animal is bartered for a dog or for prostitution, or if an animal is a crossbreed, or an animal is a yotzei doifan, is born C-section. How are we going to establish that this was a case of nireh v'nidche? How can you say that in all of these cases the animal was originally designated as a korban and then became precluded, if an animal was born that way? Thank you so much, Sonic. So it seems that these are things that were from their inception, were never usable for the Mizbech. So how does that work? So the Gemara answers, Kesavar, because we're talking about bivlados kadshim, we're talking about where a person barters the fetus. In other words, a pregnant cow has been sanctified as a korban, and its fetus goes along with the mother. And therefore, if I go ahead and I barter that animal, I will have the possibility of that stigma of being bartered for an esnan zona and mechir kelev attached to the fetus, because the principle here is that the fetus does not become completely sanctified for Hashem until it actually exits the womb, according to this opinion. So therefore, once it exits the womb, it becomes sanctified for God and God's property. While it's in the mother's stomach, it still is the property of the owner of that pregnant cow, even though the cow itself is sanctified. And so therefore, the animal can actually be called what's called nira v'nidche. It is originally usable as a korban when it's eventually born, and then becomes precluded because it's now bartered for illicit purposes. And the same thing will be true with kilayim and yotzei dofen. If an animal is a crossbreed, its crossbreed stigma does not become a problem until after it's born, and its yotzei dofen status, being born C-section, only becomes a problem after it's born. So therefore, it's considered to be nir'eh while it's in the womb, in some sense, and that potentially it's usable as a korban, and then it becomes later precluded. And so that's the reason why in all of these cases, you need the second phrase in the pasuk to tell you that even though it's at some time usable for the mizbeach, and then afterwards becomes precluded, it still is not subject to the Isser Kares of Shchutei Chutz. Okay, let us go on to the next case. Ba'alei mumin v'chulei, oso ve'espeno v'chulei. Now, the next thing that we saw in the Mishnah is that there was a machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon on the following situation. What if an animal is temporarily precluded from being used as a korban? And its temporary preclusion, I take it while during its period of temporary preclusion, and I slaughter it outside. Am I subject to kares or not? So both of them agree that I'm not subject to kares, but the Chachamim say you don't. You have no penalty whatsoever, and according to Reb Shimon, you were over on a mitzvahs lo saseh. So the question is, what's the issue? So Reb Shimon looks at it and he says, look, three examples are brought of a temporary preclusion. One is a temporary temporary blemish that will heal after a while. Another example is a bird that is too young to be brought on the mizbeach. So it's a temporary preclusion. You have to wait until the bird matures. Its feathers get to a certain plumage. And then the third example that was given in the Mishnah was oso ve'espino. Let's say today I already slaughtered the mother of this calf. So the Torah says you're not allowed to slaughter a calf and its mother on the same day. So today it's temporarily precluded. If I were to go ahead and slaughter that calf outside the temple, according to the Chachamim, I have incurred zero infraction. And according to Reb Shimon, I don't get kares, but I incur a mitzvahs lo saseh infraction. Because at some point later, the animal will be usable for the mizbeach. So that's the machlokas. So the first thing that the Gemara has to deal with is why do you need three examples to illustrate all the same concept, which is temporary preclusion. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why you need all three. Di'itana bali mumin mishum demeisi, aval torin delo meisi, ema demodi leila Reb Shimon. He says, because if I only had the case of a temporary blemish, maybe only there would the Chachamim hold that a temporary preclusion is like a permanent preclusion, and therefore there's no infraction at all. Why? Because not only is it a preclusion, but it's an unsightly preclusion. Who would want to bring a balmum on the mizbeach? But an immature bird, there's nothing inherently wrong with its immaturity, just the fact that it's not old enough. So maybe the Chachamim would agree that it's not ma'us, it's not something unseemly for the mizbeach, and therefore at least you get an infraction. V'itana torin mishum delo chazu v'idchu, avol bali mumin de'ichsu v'idchu, ema demodu lehu Reb Shimon l'Rabbanan. And let's go to the second case. If I only talked about the immature bird as a temporary preclusion, maybe only there does Reb Shimon say that you are liable for an infraction because the bird was never usable. But maybe in a situation where, let's say a balmum, where it's originally it didn't have a mum, and then it later developed a mum. So maybe Reb Shimon would agree to the Chachamim that you're totally off the hook, because since its preclusion took place at a time after the fact, where it was at one time usable and now it's totally not usable, so it's now totally precluded from its prior usability. Maybe there Reb Shimon would agree that you're totally off the hook in that case. V'itana hanitarte mishum tepsula degufayhu, aval oso ve'espeno tepsula me'alma ka'asi la emamodi leRabbanu leReb Shimon tzricha. And if I only had the first two cases, which was a temporary blemish and an immature bird, maybe I would say that the reason why the Chachamim say you're totally off the hook is because it's a physical defect, a physical deficiency, either because of a blemish or because of physical immaturity. But let's say a non-physical stigma, such as oso ve'espino, just because I slaughtered its mother today, but there's no physical manifestation of this calf's inability to be slaughtered today. So maybe I would argue the Chachamim might agree to Reb Shimon that that there is some kind of infraction because of the non-physical nature of the preclusion. There is nevertheless an infraction that lingers, and therefore you need all three cases to tell you that the Chachamim argue with Reb Shimon in all three of these cases, because a temporary preclusion for the Chachamim is like a permanent preclusion, and therefore you get no infraction at all. Shahaya Reb Shimon Oimer, because what did Reb Shimon say? That when it comes to a temporary preclusion, even though I agree that there's no kares, but there's still a violation of the mitzvah lo saseh. My time in the Reb Shimon, what is his reason? Amar Rabbi Ilah, Amar Reish Lakish, Da Amar Kra, Lo Sa'asun Kechol Asher Anachnu Osim Po Hayom. So there's a pasuk that is vague in its verbiage, but it's clearly referring to the fact that situations change based upon the presence of a temple. And so Chazal understand that this pasuk is referring to a time of heter habamos. Now we just have to clarify. During the first 14 years that Yoshua brought the Jews into Eretz Yisrael, they were involved in kivush and chiluk haaretz. They were involved in the conquest and the division of the land. This was a time of what's called heter habamos, where it was permitted to build private altars and to offer certain limited kinds of karbanos. Only voluntary karbanos, not obligatory karbanos. Furthermore, there was a bama gedola, there was a public communal bama, an altar, in the town of Gilgal that was used for communal sacrifices, both voluntary and obligatory, but a person during the time of Bamos was not allowed to offer an obligatory korban. So if you had a personal korban chatas, because say I accidentally was machalel Shabbos, I could not bring my korban chatas either on a private bama or on the public bama that was in Gilgal. I had to wait for the Mishkan to be set up in Shiloh in order to bring a personal obligatory korban. And what the Torah is basically saying, based on Reb Shimon's interpretation, is Amar Lahu Moshe Yisrael, Ki ailisu la'aretz, yesharos takrivu, chovos lo takrivu, that when you come into Eretz Yisrael, you can bring voluntary karbanos on your private bama, but you may not bring obligatory karbanos. The Gilgal legabe Shiloh mechusar zmanhu, u'ka'amar lahu Moshe lo sasun. And basically, Gilgal, which is the public bama, it's the public altar, at least vis-a-vis Shiloh, is considered to be something that's temporarily precluded from bringing obligatory karbanos. And the Torah says, lo sasun. You have a mitzvah lo saseh of bringing an obligatory korban in Gilgal, an obligatory personal korban in Gilgal. So what the Torah is basically saying is, you are hereby told that since there you are temporarily precluded from bringing your korban chatas until the Mishkan is set up in Shiloh, you have a temporary preclusion, and that temporary preclusion places a mitzvah lo saseh upon you, such that if you do offer your individual korban chatas in Gilgal, you will incur a mitzvah lo saseh. So what that tells you is that a temporary preclusion that is done outside of the proper place brings you a mitzvah, brings you a violation of a mitzvah lo saseh. That's how Reb Shimon knows that even though it's only a temporary preclusion, but if you do it in the wrong place, you incur a mitzvah lo saseh infraction. Amar Reb Yirmiyah Reb Zera ihachi milkanami lilki alama Amar Reb Zera hakasav naskal la'aseh. So the question then is, well, according to Reb Shimon, if a person were to offer his private korban chatas in Gilgal, he should get malchus for that because there's a mitzvahs lo saseh. Why did Rabbi Zera say, based on his understanding of a different Gemara, that you only have a mitzvahs aseh? If according to Reb Shimon, there's a mitzvahs lo saseh. So the Gemara answers, Hani mili l'Rabban l'Reb Shimon hachanami. So the Gemara answers, maybe Rabbi Zera was only referring to the Chachamim's interpretation of the pasuk. But as we've explained, that's a machlokus between the Chachamim and Reb Shimon. But according to Reb Shimon, there is an absolute mitzvahs lo saseh here involved, because that's how he uses that pasuk as the source for his shita in our Mishnah, which says that a temporary preclusion that is offered outside brings you a mitzvahs lo saseh. So Taka, you would get malchus according to Reb Shimon. So that's one answer. But Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar, panim de Gilgal legabe Shilo kechutz dami. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak gives a different answer, and he says, if you take a look at Rashi, he says, Reb Shimon nami lo laki amachusr zman. According to Reb Shimon, you also don't get malchus if you take something that is temporarily precluded and you slaughter it in the wrong place. And why is that? Because panim de Gilgal legabe Shilo chutzu legabe chovos hol de'eno kosher hakravaso hilkach bachutzu da ashkechan beilo sasa mishum iser bama velo bifnim. So it's not really clear to me 100% what Rashi is saying, but I believe what Rashi is saying is that Gilgal legabe Shilo chutzu legabe chovos hol de'eno kosher lahakravaso. He says that Gilgal only vis-a-vis Shiloh is considered to be outside, but it's really not outside. In other words, according to Reb Shimon, he agrees that perhaps you do get malchus if you offer something outside the temple when it's temporarily precluded. But in a case of Gilgal versus Shiloh, you will not get malchus if you offer your korban chatas in Gilgal, and instead of waiting until you get to Shiloh. Because only vis-a-vis Shiloh is Gilgal considered to be chutz. But on an absolute level, Gilgal is still considered to be bifnim. It is its own altar. And therefore, offering it in Gilgal instead of waiting to go to Shiloh, you won't get malchus for that, but it's still an infraction. So I think that's what Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is suggesting. Now, Rabba Omar, Taimei de Reb Shimon, Rabba says that Reb Shimon's reasoning is not based on the pasuk of that we just quoted, Lo Sa'asun, that you shall not do that regarding the individual korban in Gilgal instead of waiting for Shiloh, but rather it's based on the following brisa. Kidetanya Rabbi Shimon Omer, Minayin lezoveach Pesach, bebomas yachid bishas yitzer habama shehu below sa'aseh. It's based on a different pasuk, also having to do with the time of bamos. It says, how do I know that if a person would take a paschal sacrifice at a time when he takes it places it on a private altar at a time when bamos are prohibited, how do I know that he gets a mitzvah, that he incurs a mitzvah lo saseh? Talmud lomar lo suchal lizboach es hapasach, because the Torah says you are not permitted to offer the korban pesach in one of your gates. Yachol af bishas heter habamos kain. You might think that this is true, that you get the mitzvahs lo saseh even when bamos are permitted. Talmud lomar be'achad she'arecha lo amarti lecha ela b'shah shekol Yisrael nichnasim b'shar echad. So therefore the Torah says, no, be'achad she'arecha. You may not offer the korban pesach on a private bama when there's ba'achad she'arecha, when one of your gates has been designated for that purpose. Meaning that the pasuk is only telling you that if I take my paschal sacrifice and I place it on a private altar, I incur a mitzvah lo saseh because I should have brought it to the temple. But if there is no temple, if there is no mishkan, then I don't incur a mitzvah lo saseh for offering it on a private bama. So that's the end of the brisa. What are we trying to infer from this? So Amos. So the brisa asks, what is this brisa talking about? Inema achar chatzos kares nami michayev. If you were to take your paschal lamb after midday on the 14th of Nisan, when it's supposed to be brought inside the temple, and you were to shecht it outside, that's mamish chutei chutz. So why shouldn't you get kares for that? Elalav kodem chatzos. So it must be saying that you brought it before chatzos, so it's temporarily precluded because you brought it before it was supposed to be brought. And you see from here that what the Bryce is telling you is that there's a mitzvahs lo saseh that you incur for shechting a korban at a time when it is temporarily precluded. That's where Reb Shimon learns that anytime something is temporarily precluded, and if you wait, it'll be usable for the mizbeach, but you didn't wait and you shechted it outside, there's a mitzvahs lo saseh. So the Gemara says that's not necessarily a raya, because la'olam la'achar chatzos uvish'as heter habamos koi. Maybe I'll tell you that no, the Bryce is talking about where you shechted the lamb after chatzos at a time when you're allowed to use private altars. And what the Torah is telling you is a paschal sacrifice has to be brought in Gilgal because it's considered to be part of a communal service. And you don't have a right to slaughter it on a private altar. That's what the Torah is telling you. But wait a minute. V'habishas iser habamos ka'amar. But 1 second, the Brisa says explicitly that it's not talking about heter habamos. It's talking about a time of iser habamos. It says, Farish in the Brisa, that where this prohibition only applies when bamos are prohibited. So iser bamalo, heter bama lechavera. So the Gemara says maybe you could interpret whether what the Brisa means is that it's at a time of bamos are permitted for voluntary offerings, but not for obligatory karbanos such as the Karban Pesach. So when it says at a time of Isser Habamos, it means when private altars are prohibited for paschal sacrifices, because you can only bring those in Gilgal. But it's not talking about a time when there's a Beis HaMikdash, but rather it's talking about a time when there's no Beis HaMikdash. And therefore what the Bryce is telling you is, when there's no Beis HaMikdash, and you offer your paschal lamb at the proper time on a private altar, you incur a mitzvahs lo saseh. If you were to do that when b'shas Isser Habamos, when there's a temple, and you were to offer your paschal lamb after chatzos outside the temple, then you would get kares. So you have no raya to Reb Shimon Shita according to this new interpretation of the Brisa. I know this is confusing, just bear with us. Mechusar zman v'chulei. Then the next part of our Mishnah, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that if a person has a perfectly good korban, but the person himself or herself is not yet able to bring the korban because they have not gone through the proper purification process, and instead of, therefore, at this stage of their lack of readiness, they take that animal and they shecht it outside, they too are patur from shchutei chutz, from that kares, because that animal is not yet usable for them inside the Beis HaMikdash. So what were some of the examples? So the Mishnah had said, Ezehu mechusar zman b'ba'olav. Give me an example of where the person, the owner of that animal, is not yet ready to bring the korban. Hazav v'hazava v'hayoledes v'hamitzora. If you have a person who's had a gonorrheal emission, or a woman who's just given birth, or a mitzora, and they have not gone through the requisite number of days of purification, but they've designated an animal for their purification process, sheikrivu chatasam va'ashamim b'chutz piturin. If they offer their chatas or asham outside the temple, they will be patur from kares, but oloseim v'shalmeim b'chutz chayavin. But if they offer their ola and their shlamim, since those are not directly linked to their lack of readiness, they will be liable for kares. So the Gemara now says, let's unpack this. So, v'hani b'nei ashamos ninhu, amar ze'eri tani mitzora bahadayu. Now, the Gemara is working under the assumption that the only people who were listed in the Mishnah are a zav and a zava and a yoledes. Now, when these people want to bring their purification sacrifice, they bring a korban chatas. There's no korban asham involved. So the Gemara says, where does korban asham come in if our girsa of the Mishnah is only a zav and a zava and a yoledes? Where does a korban asham? So Ze'eri says, part of the girsa of the Mishnah is a mitzora as well is included. And that's actually part of our Mishnah. So Ze'eri's addendum, or sort of like his modification of the language of the Mishnah, was actually adopted by our printer. Okay? But then, oloseim v'shalmehem, but their ola and their shlamim sacrifice that they offer is not considered to be defective or precluded just because they haven't finished their process. And so therefore, if they offer that, they will still be liable for shchutei chutz, they'll still get kares. So v'hani b'nei shlomim ninu, since when are these people who have given childbirth or a mitzorah, since when do they bring a carbon shlomim? What obligatory carbon shlomim do they have to bring? So answers Rav Sheshes, Omer Rav Sheshes, Tani Nazir Bahadayu. Actually added to the list is a Nazir as well. Because a Nazir has to bring a Chatas and Asham and a Shlamim. And because he's got to bring all three karbanos, I hope I'm remembering that correctly, Chatas, Asham, and Shlamim, I hope I'm not confusing it. But anyway, he's got to bring three karbanos, and one of them is a Shlamim. So the point that the Mishnah is making is that a Nazir, if he brings his Chatas prematurely, he will not be liable. But if he brings his Ola prematurely, since it's not, his Shlamim prematurely, since it's not part of his process of purification, he will still be liable for shchutei chutz. So the Gemara's point then is that the ze'eri kiva'u tanoi, the Rav Sheshes lo kiva'u hatanoi, that Ze'eri's modification of the Mishnah to include the word mitzorah in the Mishnah was actually adopted by the redactors of the Mishnah, and it was made a permanent part of the text of the Mishnah as we have it. But Rav Shesh's modification of the Mishnah to add the word Nazir was not adopted as the formal text of the Mishnah, but was rather considered to be an addendum that would be left as an oral tradition. So it was not adopted as part of the formal text. You know, we have this many times when the Gemara says, Chisurei mechsera v'hachi ketani. You're right. There is a segment missing from the Mishnah, but we don't adopt it as a formal part of the text of the Mishnah, but we leave it as part of the Torah Sheba'al Peh of the Mishnah that you have to add it in. And so that's why we have the word mitzorah in our Mishnah, but we don't have the word Nazir, even though Rav Sheshes said it belongs there as well. Let's go on to the next part. Now, even though this has been complicated enough, we're going to see just one more level of complication, and then we're going to be done. Okay? Amar Reb Chilkiah bar Tuvi, Lo shanu elo lishmo, aval shelo lishmo chayav, hol v'roi l'shelo lishmo bifnim. Now, we just learned that if someone is precluded from bringing their carbon, and they instead slaughter it outside, so they're not going to be liable for shchutei chutz. They don't get kares, right? Because since it's not usable inside, they're not going to get kares for shechting it outside. But that's only if I take, let's say, a carbon asham that I'm not able to bring inside and I shecht it outside. But what if I take a carbon asham and I take it and I'm not yet able to bring it inside? But I take it outside and I shecht it shelo lishma. I shecht it for the sake of a shlamim. So there I will get kares. You know why? Because since if I took it inside and I shechted it for a shlamim, it's still kosher. Therefore, if I shecht it outside, I get kares. That's Rav Chilkiah's chiddush. So the Gemara now says, "Ihachi lishmo nami nichayv hol v'roi l'shelo lishmo bifnim." So the Gemara says, well, by that argument, then even if you were to shecht it for the sake of a shlamim outside, you should still get kares. Because in theory, you could have always used it inside for a shlamim. Because we know that if you shecht a carbon shelo lishma, with the exception of a chatas, if you shecht any other carbon shelo lishma, it's kosher. You don't fulfill your obligation, but it's still kosher for the mizbeach. So the question that the Gemara is asking is, if you're saying in theory, if I would have done it shelo lishma inside, it would be kosher. So then even if I do it lishma outside, I should still get kares. So the Gemara says mechuser akira. No, you have to actually physically or verbally designate this animal as a shlamim outside in order for it to be removed from its asham status. But if you retain its asham status, since if it would have retained its asham status inside, it would not be usable for the mizbeach, by shechting it outside, you don't get kares. But only after you verbally designate it as a non-asham, as a shlamim, for example, do we say that you will get kares. Okay, so maskif la Rav Huna. So basically, he's asking a logical question, Rav Huna. He says this is so counterintuitive. You're essentially saying that if I do something shelo lishma, it works. But when I do it lishma, it doesn't work. Where do you find such a thing? When I do it lishma, I do it for the sake of the asham. I'm patur from kares because it's not usable inside. But if I do it shelo lishma, like this, it's like a double negative. It's outside the temple and it's shelo lishma. So therefore, I do get kares. Where do you ever see that something has efficacy when it's done shelo lishma, but it has no efficacy when it's done lishma? So the Gemara says, "V'lo v'harei Pesach v'sha'ar yemos hashana de'eno kosher lishma v'kosher shelo lishma." So the Gemara says, I'll give you an example of that. If I take a Paschal lamb, and instead of offering it after Chatzos on the 14th of Nisan, I offer it any other day of the other 364 days out of the year. So if I offer it lishma, totally puzzle. But if I offer it shelo lishma, it's kosher because it works as a shlamim. So you see an example of doing something shelo lishma has efficacy, whereas doing it lishma has no efficacy. So the Gemara says that's an example. The Gemara says that's not a good example because Pesach bishar yemos hashana shlamim ninu. Because the Torah already designates a Paschal lamb that is being offered any other day other than the 14th of Nisan as a karban shlamim. The Torah already pre-designates that animal as a karban shlamim. So that's not really a good illustration of what we're talking about over here. But nevertheless, Reb Chilkiya's Shita still maintains in the Gemara. And Reb Chilkiya basically says that granted, if the animal is not usable inside, and I shecht it shelo lishma, I shecht it rather outside, I don't get kares, but if I shecht it shelo lishma outside, I do get kares, since if I did it shelo lishma inside, it would still be a kosher karb. So the Gemara now says, Lema misayele. Let us say that the following brisa supports Reb Chilkiya's Shita. What does the brisa say? Yachol sha'ani motzi af olas mechusar zman beba'alim v'asham nazir v'asham mitzora. You might think that precluded from the kares of shchutei chutz includes where the owner is not yet ready to bring the korban, and he's not yet ready to bring his korban ola, or there's a korban asham of a nazir that's for whatever reason is not usable, or a korban asham of a mitzora that's not yet usable. You might think that if these things are slaughtered outside the temple, a person will be off the hook. So tamulomar shor mikol makom, kesev mikol makom, eiz mikol makom. So therefore the Torah adds the words shor, kesev, and eiz by the law of shchutei chutz to tell you that even though these animals are precluded from being brought inside, you will still be liable for them if you shech them outside. That's the end of the brisa. So the Gemara points out a couple of diukim. V'ilu chata shaira. And it leaves out, it only talks about an ola and an asham in this brisa, but it doesn't mention a chatas. That's an interesting omission. So the question is, b'mai askina. What are we dealing with in this brisa? Ilema bismano, if you're going to tell me that the korban is ready to be brought by the owner is ready to bring this asham, is ready to bring this ola, because he's finished his purification process, and instead he shechts it outside, my irya asham afilu chatas nami. Then why only are you liable for shchutei chutz for an asham? The brisa should have said for a chatas also. So ella shelo bismano uvamai. So we must be saying that no, the animal is temporarily precluded because the owner is not yet ready to bring that korban. So the animal is precluded from being brought. It cannot be brought as an asham. It cannot be brought as an ola yet. Uvamai ilema lishmo asham amai chayav. If you're going to tell me that he's bringing it lishma, he's shechting it lishma outside the temple, so then why does the brisa say he gets kares? Our Mishnah says explicitly that you don't get kares. If the owner is not yet ready to bring the korban asham, and he shechts it outside instead, he doesn't get kares for that. So why does the brisa say you do get kares? Elalav shelo lishmo. So the brisa must be talking about Rav Chilkiya's case. It must be saying, you're not yet ready to bring the korban asham inside, and you shecht it outside, but you still get kares. Why? Because not only is it not yet ready, but it's also not only is it precluded, but it's being shechted shelo lishma. It's being shechted for the sake of a shlamim. And since it was shechted for the sake of a shlamim, like Reb Chilkiya said, it's shelo lishma. Since it would, if it was brought inside, it would be kosher. If it's brought outside, you get kares for. So doesn't that prove Reb Chilkiya's shita? So the Gemara says no, not necessarily. La'olam bizmano v'shelo lishmo, v'Rabbi Eliezer he da'omer makshinan asham lechatas, v'tana tafel v'hu hadin ikar. And with this we'll end. Really, says the Gemara, maybe this brisa goes according to Rabbi Eliezer. If you go back to the very first Mishnah in Maseches Zevachim, what did we learn? That the shita of Rabbi Eliezer is that not only a chatas that shechted shelo lishma is pasul, but even a carbon asham that is shechted shelo lishma is pasul. So Rabbi Eliezer holds that really there's no difference between a chatas and an asham. If you shechted shelo lishma, it's pasul. But what is the brisa telling you? That even according to Rabbi Eliezer, who says that there's no difference between an asham and a chatas, just because if you were to shecht it inside the temple, it would be precluded. But the chiddush is that if it's done outside the temple, like Rashi says, the makish asham lechatas, the mifsal b'shelo lishmo bifnim ba'ashamos, afilu hachi mechayev ala b'chutz, afal kav da'akar minei shem asham. He says, according to Rabbi Eliezer, even though you've actually shechted this animal shelo lishma, you're still going to be liable for shchutei chutz. Because Rabbi Eliezer's shita is different from the other Tanoim. The other Tanoim hold that if something is precluded from being brought inside the temple, if you shecht it, it's considered to be bismano. Everything is in its proper time. If you were to shecht that animal when it's supposed to be brought in its proper time inside the temple, and you shecht it outside, you're going to be chayiv kares. Rabbi Eliezer holds that that's true even if you shecht it shelo lishma. You're going to tell me if I shecht it shelo lishma inside the temple, it would not be usable. So why should I be chayiv kares for shchutei chutz? Rabbi Eliezer holds your verbal designation is not enough to remove the stigma of kares for shechting something that was pre-designated as a carbon chatas or a carbon asham, and when you do it outside the temple. So that's Rabbi Eliezer's shita. But you have no raya to Reb Chilkiya's shita, which is when an animal is chronologically precluded because the owner has not yet finished his purification process. If I shecht it outside shelo lishma, then I'm going to get kares. That we have no raya to from this brisa. So we're going to hold it here for today. Very confusing.